A courtroom drama, unlike any other. We walk into the middle of a high-profile, brutal divorce. On one side, a wife who has been silenced, controlled, and isolated for a decade. On the other, a powerful husband who will do anything to leave her with nothing. And sitting right behind him, a mistress who laughs, thinking she's already won. But what happens when the victim's body finally gives out? What happens when the wife collapses on the stand? This isn't just a story of a breakdown. This is the story of a trap. This is the story of how a single, simple word, defendant, brought an entire empire of lies, deceit, and crime crashing to the ground, live in open court. The silence in the Bel Air mansion was its own kind of violence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the sterile, pressurized silence of a tomb, a $40 million glass and marble box perched in the hills, meticulously curated by Johnny Vance to be his monument. And Elena Vance. She was just one of the sculptures. For 12 years, Elena had played the part of the perfect wife. She hosted the fundraisers for forgotten diseases, her smile as bright and brittle as the champagne flutes. She wore the couture gowns Johnny's stylist, a corporate-looking woman named Therese, approved for her. She was thin, elegant, and utterly vacant. Johnny called it poise. Elena knew it was erasure. Johnny Vance was not a man. He was a brand. Vance Holdings dominated the downtown LA skyline with his angular, imposing signature on 3 different skyscrapers. He was charismatic to the press and a tyrant to his staff. To Elena, he was a sculptor chipping away at her until only the shape he desired remained. He controlled her friendships, her schedule, and most importantly, the money. She was given an allowance, a word that chafed her soul deposited into an account he monitored daily. The end began not with a lipstick-stained collar or a suspicious text message. Johnny was far too meticulous for such common vulgarity. It began with a misplaced hard drive. Johnny had been on a business trip to Singapore for a week. The house for the first time felt like it could breathe. Elena was in his sprawling, mahogany-paneled office, looking for a simple book on gardening, a small, forbidden hobby she pursued in secret when she found it. Tucked behind a row of leather-bound financial reports was a small silver thumb drive. Curiosity, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, flared. She plugged it into her laptop. It wasn't love letters. It was ledgers. Encrypted spreadsheets, shell corporations, and bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Delaware. It was millions. No tens of millions. And the names. Project Sterling. Sterling Futures LLC. CS Capital. And then a video file. She clicked it. A new tab opened, revealing a secure cloud storage folder. It wasn't just files. It was a life. Photos and videos. Johnny not in his stiff Tom Ford suits, but in linen shirts on a yacht. He was laughing a real, unguarded laugh she hadn't heard in a decade. And wrapped around him was a woman. She was young, probably mid-20s, with sharp fox-like features, and hair the color of bottled sunshine. She was looking at the camera, at Johnny's camera, with a look of such smug ownership that Elena felt a physical chill. This was Callie Sterling. Elena didn't just find an affair. She found the motive. The ledgers weren't just for his business. They were for their new life. He wasn't just cheating on Elena. He was robbing from her. From the company, from everyone. When she confronted him holding the printed-out ledger sheet for Sterling Futures, his mask didn't just slip, it evaporated. The affable CEO was gone, replaced by the cold predator she always knew lived beneath. "You shouldn't have done that, Elena," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. 2 days later, she was served with divorce papers. He filed first. He claimed irreconcilable differences, and in a masterful stroke of cruelty petitioned to have the prenup, which she had signed without reading on his insistence, enforced. The prenup that stated she was entitled to $50,000 for every year of marriage and nothing more. It cited her emotional instability and profligate spending as reasons for the dissolution. He was going to drain the company, frame her for the instability that broke the marriage, and leave her with pennies while he and Callie Sterling sailed off on a sea of stolen cash. Elena knew she had one chance. She took the copies she had made of the ledgers to the only lawyer in town who wasn't on Johnny's payroll, an old-school, rumpled-suited bulldog named Arthur Harrison. Harrison looked at the documents, then at Elena for a long, silent minute. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "This isn't a divorce. This is a crime scene. Which is how Elena found herself 3 months later walking up the steps of the Los Angeles Superior Court, her stomach in knots. The press was already there, a frenzy of cameras. Johnny was painting her as a bitter, gold-digging shrew. She pushed through the doors, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her purse. She felt small, terrified, and utterly alone. She was walking into her own execution. The courtroom was packed. Department 2B was a grand, imposing room with dark wood paneling that seemed to drink the light. It smelled of old paper floor wax and a faint electric tang of anxiety. The gallery was filled with whispering journalists, a few stern-faced men in dark suits Elena didn't recognize, and Johnny's entire PR team strategically placed. Elena and Arthur Harrison took their places at the petitioner's table. Harrison was meticulously arranging stacks of files, his face a mask of bored neutrality. Then they arrived. Johnny Vance swept in not as a man facing a divorce, but as a CEO entering a boardroom. He was tanned immaculate in a navy Brioni suit and smiling. His lawyer, Ms. Evelyn Thorne, was his perfect counterpart, a woman so sharp she looked like she could cut glass with a glance. She carried a single, slim leather briefcase. And behind them, as if she had every right to be there, was Callie Sterling. She was dressed not for court, but for a victory party. A tight, cream-colored dress that cost more than Elena's entire allowance for a year. Stiletto heels that clicked with sharp, arrogant authority on the marble floor. Her blonde hair was a perfect, shining helmet. She didn't sit in the gallery. She sat in the row directly behind Johnny, and Ms. Thorne leaned forward and whispered something in Johnny's ear. He laughed. Elena's blood ran cold. The audacity was staggering. It was a power play, a message to Elena, and the entire room. I am the present. She is the past. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Maria Strickland entered. She was a small, severe woman in her 60s, with intelligent, impatient eyes. She did not look impressed by the media circus, the expensive suits, or the palpable drama. We are here for Vance, Judge Strickland said, her voice cutting through the whispers. Ms. Thorne, your client is the petitioner. You may begin. Evelyn Thorne stood. Thank you, Your Honor. The attack was immediate and brutal. For 2 hours, Thorne painted a portrait of Elena Vance that Elena herself barely recognized. She was erratic, unstable, and prone to paranoid delusions. She presented receipts from Rodeo Drive, all approved by Johnny's office, as evidence of her uncontrolled manic spending. She brought up a spa vacation, Elena took 5 years ago, twisting a doctor-recommended retreat for exhaustion into a secretive disappearance. Mrs. Vance lived a life of unimaginable luxury, Thorne declared, her voice ringing with synthetic outrage. A life funded entirely by the genius and hard work of my client. And when she sensed that work might be slowing, she fabricated a narrative of infidelity to break the prenuptial agreement and seize half of an empire she did nothing to build. It was all lies. Every word was a poisoned dart. Elena sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap, feeling the eyes of the gallery on her. She could hear even when she couldn't see the occasional soft titter from Callie Sterling. Then Johnny was called to the stand. He was a master performer. He was sad, reluctant, and deeply concerned for Elena. "I just want what's best for her," he said, his voice catching perfectly. "I truly do. But the spending the rages, I couldn't handle it anymore. I came home one day and she accused me of an elaborate conspiracy, of stealing money. It was frightening. I knew then that the woman I married was gone." "Mr. Vance," Thorne asked gently, "did you ever give your wife reason to suspect infidelity?" "Never," Johnny said, looking directly at the judge. "My focus has always been my work, my wife, our life." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. She looked at Harrison, but he was just scribbling on a legal pad, seemingly unfazed. "And these financial irregularities she accused you of, Ms. Thorne," Johnny said, shaking his head with a practiced sigh. "My company is audited by the top firm in the country. Her accusations were, frankly, a fantasy, a desperate paranoid attempt to gain leverage." Elena could feel the room turning against her. She was the crazy, spoiled wife. He was the patient, brilliant husband. Behind him, Callie Sterling crossed her legs, a slow, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She looked like a cat that had just finished a bowl of cream. The morning was a masterclass in character assassination. By the time they broke for lunch, Elena was trembling. "She's lying," Elena whispered desperately to Harrison in the corridor. "He's lying. They're all lying." "I know," Harrison said, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. "That's the point. But they're winning. You have to do something." "Patience, Mrs. Vance," he said. "The taller they build their house of cards, the further it has to fall. Let them build." When they returned from the recess, the air was thicker. Ms. Thorne's predation sharpened. "Your Honor," Thorne said, "the defense has made claims of financial malfeasance. We would like to preemptively disprove these fantasies. I call Elena Vance to the stand." This was it. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She walked to the stand, her legs feeling like water. She swore the oath, her voice a reedy whisper. Ms. Thorne circled her for a moment like a shark. "Mrs. Vance, you claim your husband was hiding money from you, correct?" "He was," Elena said, her voice stronger than she expected. "And yet, wasn't it you who was hiding assets?" "No, that's not true. I had no assets to hide." "No assets," Thorne's eyebrows shot up. "Really? Let's look at Exhibit D." A clerk handed Elena a document. It was a bank statement. A wire transfer. "Mrs. Vance," Thorne's voice was slick. "Do you recognize this transfer from a joint marital account at First National to a private offshore account in Belize?" Elena stared at the paper. The amount was $500,000. The date was 6 months ago. The signature authorizing the transfer looked horrifyingly like her own. I don't... You don't recognize it, or you don't recognize your own signature," Thorne pressed. $500,000, Mrs. Vance. siphoned from your husband's business account, hidden away in preparation for this very lawsuit. Is that your signature?" Elena's world tilted. "No. It looks like it, but I never did this." "Oh," Thorne smiled. "First your husband is a conspirator. Now the bank is a forger. How deep does this fantasy go?" Elena looked from the paper to Johnny. He was staring at her, his face a perfect mask of tragic disappointment. And behind him, Callie Sterling was no longer hiding her amusement. Her shoulders were shaking with silent, delighted laughter. Elena's head swam. The $500,000, the signature, the ledgers she'd found. Project Sterling. It all crashed together. This wasn't just a random forgery. This was the frame. This was the document they were going to use to have her charged to prove she was the one stealing. "I didn't do this," she whispered, her throat closing. "You'll have to speak up, Mrs. Vance," Thorne barked. I... Elena looked at Johnny, his cold, dead eyes. She saw Callie now covering her mouth, her eyes sparkling with malicious joy. The room was spinning. The air was too thin. The judge's face was blurring. Laughter. A distinct, sharp, clear laugh from Callie. "Pathetic," she whispered, just loud enough for the first few rows to hear. That sound, that one cruel sound, was the final blow. Elena's vision tunneled. The betrayal wasn't just the affair or the theft. It was this public, gleeful execution. The last of her strength evaporated. Her hand went to her head, she swayed on the stand, and with a soft, desperate sigh, Elena Vance crumpled to the floor. Chaos erupted. "Order!" Judge Strickland's gavel cracked like a gunshot, but it was lost in the sound of journalists scrambling and Ms. Thorne shouting, "Your Honor!" The bailiff rushed to the witness box. Arthur Harrison was at Elena's side in an instant, shielding her from the clicking cameras. "Recess 10 minutes!" the judge roared. "Clear the courtroom! Now!" Elena was vaguely aware of being lifted of Harrison's strong grip on her arm. "Breathe, Elena. Just breathe. You're fine." But he and the bailiff half carried her into the small, sterile conference room reserved for counsel. The bailiff, a kindly older man, handed her a paper cup of water. I... Elena was hyperventilating, her face pale and clammy. "They framed me," she gasped, her eyes wild with terror. "Arthur, that was my signature. How did they do that? They're going to arrest me." Harrison shut the door, blocking the sounds of the hallway. He didn't comfort her. He didn't pat her on the back. He leaned against the table, crossed his arms, and his bored expression was replaced by one of intense, diamond-hard focus. "Yes, they did," he said calmly. "They're very good. That $500,000 was their get-out-of-jail-free card." "What are you talking about?" "It's my go-to-jail card." "Elena, listen to me." Harrison's voice was low and urgent. "I knew they were going to pull something. I didn't know what. That document is their masterpiece. They've been planning this for months. They move tens of millions offshore, and to cover their tracks, they create one sloppy, obvious transfer perfectly forged to an account in your name. When the whole thing blows up, they point to you. The unstable, greedy wife who got in over her head. You take the fall." Elena stared at him, the fog of her panic beginning to clear, replaced by a cold horror. "So, what do we do? I just fainted in front of the judge. They think I'm guilty and weak." "No," Harrison said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "You just proved you're innocent." "What? A guilty person would have denied it. They would have been angry. They would have fought." He tapped his temple. "You, Elena, you reacted with pure, unadulterated shock. You showed this court what true betrayal looks like. Your collapse wasn't weakness. It was testimony. And now, he straightened his tie. They've overplayed their hand. They put the gun in your hand. It's time to show them it's loaded. I don't understand. You don't have to. Just get back on that stand, keep your composure, and tell the truth. I'll handle the rest. He opened the door. Showtime. When they re-entered the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The press gallery was buzzing. Johnny and Ms. Thorne were huddled, whispering furiously. They looked annoyed by the delay, not worried. Callie had reapplied her lipstick and was scrolling through her phone, bored. Mrs. Vance, Judge Strickland said, her tone softening slightly. Are you able to continue? Yes, Your Honor, Elena said. Her voice was still shaky, but a new cold anger was settling in her stomach. Ms. Thorne, the judge nodded. You were cross-examining. Thorne, smelling blood in the water, went in for the kill. Mrs. Vance, let's return to Exhibit D. The $500,000 you don't remember transferring. Do you deny that this is your signature? It looks like my signature, Elena said clearly. But I have never seen this document, and I did not authorize this transfer. So, to be clear, your testimony is that your husband, a respected pillar of the business community, has forged this document to frame you. Thorne scoffed. Objection, Harrison said, standing up lazily. Counsel is characterizing. My client stated what she did not, what Mr. Vance did. Sustained, the judge sighed. Ms. Thorne, move it along. I have no further questions for this witness, Thorne spat, sitting down. The document speaks for itself. The petitioner rests. The room held its breath. It looked like a knockout. Johnny had lied. Thorne had planted the seed of Elena's guilt, and Elena had collapsed. Game, set, match. Mr. Harrison, Judge Strickland said. Your witness. Harrison stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I have no questions for my client at this time. Elena stepped down, her heart pounding. Thorne and Johnny shared a confused, then smug glance. Had he given up? The defense calls its first witness, Harrison announced, his voice suddenly booming in the quiet room. I call Detective Michael Corrigan, LAPD, to the stand. A man in a rumpled suit stood up from the back of the courtroom, one of the stern-faced men Elena had noticed earlier. The entire atmosphere of the room changed. This was no longer a divorce. Johnny Vance, for the first time, looked startled. His head whipped around to watch the detective walk to the stand. Ms. Thorne was on her feet. Objection, Your Honor. What is this? This is a marital dissolution proceeding. The defense provided no notice of this witness. This is procedural ambush. It is Your Honor, Harrison agreed cheerfully. And it's entirely appropriate. Ms. Thorne just spent her entire morning arguing that my client is prone to paranoid delusions about financial conspiracies. This witness is here to speak directly to those delusions. He is, in fact, the lead investigator of the very conspiracy my client is being accused of fantasizing about. Judge Strickland leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Harrison. The impatience was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intelligence. Mrs. Thorne, you opened this door, the judge said. You brought allegations of criminal fraud into this civil proceeding via Exhibit D. Mr. Harrison has a right to rebut it. Objection overruled. Swear in the witness. Detective Corrigan took the stand. He looked bored, tough, and completely unimpressed by the wealth in the room. Ms. Thorne sat down, but she was no longer relaxed. She was rigid. Johnny was staring at Corrigan, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. And behind him, Callie Sterling had finally put down her phone. Detective Corrigan, Harrison began, could you please state your name and division for the court? Detective Michael Corrigan. I'm with the Los Angeles Police Department Economic Crimes Division. And for how long have you been investigating white-collar crime, Detective? 22 years. Thank you, Harrison said. Detective, are you currently involved in an active investigation? I am. And does that investigation involve anyone present in this courtroom today? Objection. Thorne leaped up. Relevance. This is a fishing expedition. Overruled, snapped the judge. This is highly relevant given your own Exhibit D. Answer the question, Detective. Yes, Corrigan said, his voice flat. My division has been actively investigating Vance Holdings and its CEO, Mr. Johnny Vance, for 6 months. A bomb had gone off in the room. The journalists were texting so fast their thumbs were blurs. Johnny Vance turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. And what is the nature of that investigation, Detective? Wire fraud, securities fraud, and felony embezzlement. Embezzlement from whom? From his partners, his shareholders, and investors in his flagship development project, the Olympus Tower. Harrison nodded slowly. The Olympus Tower. That's the large project downtown, correct? It's supposed to be, Corrigan said. Right now it's a 4-story concrete hole in the ground. The $80 million raised from investors for its construction is gone. Gone where, Detective? Laundered, moved through a complex series of offshore shell corporations. Harrison walked back to his table and picked up Exhibit D, the $500,000 transfer. He held it up. Detective Corrigan, do you recognize this document? Corrigan leaned forward. I do. We obtained a copy of this from the bank's servers 2 months ago under warrant. And this document is it, as Ms. Thorne alleges proof that Mrs. Elena Vance was siphoning money. Corrigan almost smiled. No, sir. This document is the cornerstone of Mr. Vance's exit strategy. Explain that, please. This transfer, Corrigan said, pointing to the paper, is a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. The signature was digitally lifted from Mrs. Vance's passport. The account in Belize was set up using a stolen copy of her social security number. It was created by Mr. Vance. Elena finally let out the breath she hadn't known she was holding. And to what end, Detective? Harrison asked. Mr. Vance and his associates were in the process of liquidating all company assets, both legitimate and illegitimate. The plan was to drain the company, declare bankruptcy, and flee the country. This $500,000 transfer was the poison pill. It was created to be found. When the SEC, the LAPD, and the defrauded investors came looking, this document would point directly to Mrs. Vance. He was going to leave her holding the bag, facing federal charges while he was gone. So my client's paranoid delusions were in fact entirely accurate, Corrigan finished. Miss Thorne was ashen. Your Honor, this is inadmissible. This detective's investigation is based on claims from a hostile and unstable witness, Mrs. Vance herself. Actually, Corrigan said, looking at Thorne, our investigation was triggered by an anonymous whistleblower inside Vance Holdings. We've had Mr. Vance under surveillance for months. We were aware of Mrs. Vance, but she wasn't a suspect. She was, in our estimation, the primary victim. Johnny Vance slumped in his chair, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like what he was, a common thief in an expensive suit. Elena looked at him. 12 years of her life dedicated to a man who, in the end, didn't just want to leave her. He wanted to destroy her. He wanted to see her in prison for his crimes. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the magnitude of the fraud. The whispers were gone, replaced by a stunned, heavy quiet. Harrison let the silence hang for a beat. He wasn't done. Detective, he continued, you mentioned associates, plural. Was Mr. Vance acting alone? No, Corrigan said. He had help. Johnny's head snapped up. He shot a look over his shoulder, a look of pure, primal panic. And who was this associate detective, the one who helped him launder the $80 million from the Olympus project? Our investigation tracked the flow of funds to a primary holding company, a shell corporation registered in Delaware. This company was the final destination for the vast majority of the stolen money. And what is the name of that company? Corrigan checked his notes. It's called Sterling Futures, LLC. The name dropped into the courtroom like a block of ice. Sterling. All eyes as one moved from the detective to the woman in the second row. Callie Sterling's face was white. The smug, bored expression was gone, replaced by a rigid, uncomprehending terror. Her eyes were wide fixed on Detective Corrigan Moose. Thorne, a skilled lawyer, saw what was happening. She was trying to recover to do her job. Objection, Your Honor, this is speculation. He can't just name a company without, and who Detective, Harrison's voice cut through hers like a razor, is the sole proprietor and signatory on all accounts for Sterling Futures, LLC. Corrigan didn't check his notes for this one. He looked directly at the second row. That would be Ms. Callie Sterling. No! Johnny Vance roared. He was on his feet, his chair crashing backward. No, she had nothing to do with it. It was just a name, a coincidence. She's not involved. It was a fatal, panicked mistake. He had just confirmed the connection, but Callie, in her own terror, made an even worse one. She scrambled to her feet, her voice a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. He's lying. Johnny, what is he saying? You told me it was a gift. You told me it was your money. I just signed the papers. I just did what you told me. She was confessing. In open court. In front of a detective, a judge, and a dozen journalists. Ms. Sterling, sit down! Ms. Thorne shouted aghast at her client's and his mistress's total implosion. No! Callie was sobbing now, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at Elena. She knew. He told me Elena was in on it, that she was the one who suggested it, to hide their money from the business partners. He said she set it all up. Elena flinched, stunned by the sheer desperate venom of the lie. And that's when it happened. Amidst her sobs and accusations, Callie Sterling, in a moment of sheer mind-breaking panic and arrogance, looked at Johnny, then at the detective, and laughed. It wasn't the smug titter from before. It was a high, thin, hysterical sound bubbling up with her tears. You can't be serious. You're going to believe her, she shrieked, gesturing at Elena. The woman who fainted. Look at her. He's the brains. I just signed things. You can't touch me. I'm a victim. The courtroom was frozen. The spectacle was horrifying. A complete psychological unraveling live on the stand. Judge Maria Strickland, who had watched this entire exchange without a word, slowly took off her glasses. She polished them on her robe, her movements deliberate, agonizingly slow. She let Callie's hysterical laughter echo in the silence. Finally, she put her glasses back on. Her eyes, magnified, were like chips of ice. Ms. Sterling. The judge's voice was dangerously quiet. The entire room strained to hear her. Your performance is noted. The judge looked past Johnny, past the lawyers, to the back of the courtroom. Mr. Diaz, she called out. Another man in a suit, whom Elena hadn't even noticed, stood up. He was from the district attorney's office. I assume, Judge Strickland said, that you're here for this. Yes, Your Honor, the prosecutor, Mr. Diaz, replied, stepping forward. Your Honor, Ms. Thorne was desperate. I must advise my client. You can advise your client in a holding cell, Ms. Thorne. Judge Strickland slammed her gavel. The sound was deafening. Detective Corrigan, you may proceed. Your Honor, Detective Corrigan said. "At this time, we have probable cause to arrest Mr. Johnny Vance for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy." "Very well." Judge Strickland looked at the bailiff. "Bailiff, please detain Mr. Vance." Two large sheriff's deputies moved from the walls. They advanced on Johnny, who seemed to have shrunk inside his expensive suit. "Take your hands off me," he whispered, but the authority was gone. They pulled his arms behind his back with practiced impersonal efficiency. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was brutally loud. Elena watched her heart, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Callie Sterling watched too, and as Johnny was cuffed, her hysteria vanished, replaced by a chilling realization. She was next. She was still standing frozen as the officers led Johnny past her. "Johnny," she cried. "Johnny, tell them I didn't know. It was just papers, Johnny." He wouldn't even look at her. He stared straight ahead, a broken man, as they pushed him through the side door. Callie was alone. She looked around, her eyes landing on the judge. The smirk, the laughter, the arrogance, it was all gone. She was just a terrified, grasping girl in a dress she couldn't afford. She tried to sit down to disappear. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Strickland said. Callie froze. "You may remain standing." The judge looked at her, then at the prosecutor, Mr. Diaz. "Mr. Diaz," the judge said, "based on the in-court sworn testimony of Detective Corrigan and the spontaneous admissions of Ms. Sterling, it seems you have a second conspirator." Callie's eyes went wide. "What? No, I'm a witness. I'm his girlfriend." Judge Strickland's face was granite. She ignored Callie and spoke to the bailiff. "Bailiff!" she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute final authority. "Detain the defendant, Ms. Sterling, as well." The word hung in the air, electric and fatal. Defendant. It struck Callie Sterling with the force of a physical blow. Her perfectly painted mouth fell open. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly white, a stark contrast to her spray tan. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "No, defendant, I'm not. You're mistaken. I'm not a defendant. This is a divorce. I'm a witness." She looked around desperately, as if searching for an adult to correct this terrible misunderstanding. Her eyes darted from the stone-faced bailiff, approaching her to Ms. Thorne, who was pointedly packing her briefcase, abandoning ship to Mr. Harrison, and finally, to Elena. Elena met her gaze. She felt no pity. She felt no triumph. She just felt empty. She was looking at the human wreckage of Johnny's ambition. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Strickland said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You just admitted in open court under no duress that you knowingly signed documents for a shell corporation. Detective Corrigan has just testified under oath that this corporation, Sterling Futures LLC, of which you are the sole proprietor, was the primary vehicle used to launder $80 million in stolen funds." The judge leaned forward. "You are not a witness. You are not a girlfriend. You are, by your own admission and by the evidence presented, a co-conspirator to a massive criminal enterprise. You are, in the eyes of this court and the state of California, a defendant." "No!" Callie shrieked as the second bailiff took her arm. The arrogance, the laughter, the power, it all disintegrated at the first touch of authority. She became a child. "No, you can't. Johnny Julian, tell them I didn't know what it was I just signed. He tricked me." She tried to pull away, her expensive heel catching on the carpet. She stumbled undignified as the bailiff firmly secured her wrist. "It's her fault," she screamed, pointing at Elena. Her face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. "That quiet little bitch, she set us up. This was her plan all along." "That's enough, Ms. Sterling," Judge Strickland said, her voice flat. "Your outburst is bordering on contempt. Bailiff, remove her." "No, please, I have a dog. I can't. Please." The laughter had fully turned to raw, panicked sobs. The click of the second pair of handcuffs was the final punctuation mark on her life as she knew it. As the officers dragged her resisting and wailing toward the same door Johnny had disappeared through, she had one last look at Elena. Her eyes were no longer hateful. They were pleading. Elena simply held her gaze solid as the marble columns around her until the door slammed shut, cutting off the cries. The courtroom fell into a profound, echoing silence. The only sound was the frantic typing of the court stenographer. The journalists were stunned, their phones lowered. They knew they had just witnessed something far beyond a celebrity divorce. Judge Strickland turned her attention back to the room. She looked at the lawyers. "Well," she said dryly, "that was eventful." She looked at Mr. Diaz. "Mr. Diaz, the criminal case of the People versus Vance and Sterling is now yours. I trust you will handle the arraignment." "Yes, Your Honor. Thank you." Then the judge's gaze softened as it landed on Elena, who was still sitting at the petitioner's table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was no longer shaking. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her tone professional but not unkind, "given the exceptional circumstances that have come to light, all proceedings related to this petition for dissolution are hereby stayed pending the outcome of the criminal trial." "Your Honor." Arthur Harrison stood. "What does that mean for my client?" "It means, Mr. Harrison," the judge said, "that all marital assets, all accounts under the name Vance Sterling or Vance Holdings are frozen effective immediately. They are now part of a criminal investigation and a receivership. Mrs. Vance," she said, looking at Elena, "I am afraid this means you will not have immediate access to any of the funds you were seeking." Elena met her gaze, and for the first time that day she smiled. A small, tired, but genuine smile. "Your Honor," Elena said, her voice clear and carrying through the room. "The money was never mine. It was stolen. I'm not here for the money." "Then what are you here for, Mrs. Vance?" the judge asked. Elena looked at the empty chair where Johnny had sat. She looked at the door where Callie had been dragged away. "I'm here for my name," Elena said. "And I believe I just got it back." Judge Strickland stared at her for a long moment, a flicker of profound respect in her eyes. "Case stayed," she declared. "We are adjourned." She struck the gavel, and the room exploded. The trial of the people, jurors Johnny Vance and Callie Sterling, became the most talked-about white-collar crime case in Los Angeles history. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the sheer brazen arrogance of the defendants. The media, which had once painted Elena as a scorned gold digger, now rebranded her as a profile in courage. She was the quiet, dignified victim who had brought down an empire. But Elena didn't read the papers. She moved out of the Bel Air mansion, which was now seized by federal marshals, and into a small rented apartment in Pasadena, using the last of the money she'd saved from her allowance over the years. She spent her days in long, quiet debriefs with Mr. Harrison and the prosecutor, Mr. Diaz, helping them piece together the timeline. It turned out Arthur Harrison was even smarter than she'd known. When Elena first came to him with the ledgers, he had immediately contacted Detective Corrigan. They had been working in parallel for months. Harrison had handled the divorce, while Corrigan built the criminal case. They let Johnny file first. They let him paint Elena as unstable. They were waiting for him to make a mistake to introduce his own fraud into the proceedings. "When you fainted," Harrison told her over coffee one morning, "I was terrified. I thought we'd pushed you too hard. But when Ms. Thorne presented that $500,000 transfer, I knew we had them. They had just handed us the entire case on a silver platter. Your collapse wasn't a breakdown, Elena. It was the linchpin. It was the moment the entire courtroom saw you as a victim, not a collaborator." The criminal trial lasted 6 weeks. It was a circus. Johnny Vance, stripped of his power, and his PR team, who had all quit, tried to blame everything on Callie. He claimed she was a master manipulator who had seduced him and tricked him into signing documents. Callie Sterling, in turn, tried to paint herself as a naive, love-struck girl. Her defense was, "I just signed what he told me to." But the prosecutor, Mr. Diaz, was ruthless. He presented text messages between Johnny and Callie that were anything but romantic. "Johnny, the old baggage is asking about the ledgers. I'm filing tomorrow. Time to activate the Belize problem." Callie, "Good. When are we dumping her and moving to Cayman? This LA smog is ruining my skin. And make sure the new Amex is in my name only. No more joint anything." But the most damning evidence was a short video found on Callie's cloud storage. It was time-stamped just 1 day after the $500,000 poison pill transfer had been faked. In the video, Callie is holding a champagne glass filming Johnny as he practices a signature on a piece of paper. It's Elena's signature. "How's that?" Johnny asks, holding it up. Callie zooms in. It's a little shaky," she says. "The E is too loopy. Do it again. We need it to be perfect." She turns the camera to herself, winks, and whispers, "Bye-bye, wifey. Prison's not going to be good for her skin." When the video played in court, the gallery gasped. Callie, sitting at the defendant's table, turned green. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The sentencing was held on a gray Tuesday. Elena was there. She sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution. Johnny Vance was found guilty on all 28 counts. The judge, citing the callous and predatory nature of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse, particularly in the attempt to frame his innocent wife, sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. He didn't react. He just stared into the middle distance, his empire reduced to a number. Then it was Callie's turn. Her lawyer begged for probation, citing her age, and manipulation by Vance. Callie herself wept reading a prepared statement about her deep regret and how she was blinded by love. The judge was unmoved. "Ms. Sterling," the judge said, looking down at her, "you were not blinded by love. You were blinded by greed. You were not a passive participant. You were an active, gleeful conspirator. You laughed at another woman's pain, and you were fully prepared to watch her go to prison for a crime you helped commit. You mistook arrogance for intelligence and cruelty for strength." Callie Sterling was found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud and 14 counts of wire fraud. She was sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility. The defendant collapsed wailing and had to be carried out by the bailiffs, her laughter finally and forever silenced. 1 year, 365 days. That's how long it took for the name Vance to be scrubbed from the high-rises and charity plaques of Los Angeles, becoming a byword for spectacular, venomous fraud. The legal battles were over. The state's case against Johnny and Callie was ironclad, and the civil suits from the defrauded investors had picked the corporate carcass clean. The final act of the Vance empire was not a gala, but an auction. A court-ordered receivership sale held at the Bel Air mansion itself. It was a grotesque circus. Elena went. She wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She walked past the velvet ropes and the valets, who were now parking the cars of gawkers and bottom feeders. The house was filled with people. Journalists were there filming the spectacle. Men in cheap suits with clipboards were tagging every item. And the wives, the other corporate wives she had known, they were there too. They drifted through the sterile glass-walled rooms like designer ghosts, picking at the artifacts of Elena's former life. They didn't speak to her. They spoke about her in sharp, stage-whispered asides. Can you imagine he was going to put her in jail? So tacky. Well, she got the last laugh, didn't she? Though, look at her. She gets nothing. That's what the paper said. The prenup holds, but there's nothing to get. She's destitute. Honestly, what a waste of a good collapse. Elena felt their eyes on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and a strange, cold fear, the fear that their own gilded cages might be just as fragile. She felt none of it. She was not Elena Vance, the disgraced wife. She was Elena Matheson, a tourist visiting a museum of her own imprisonment. The prenup had indeed held a final useless insult from Johnny. She was entitled to $50,000 for every year of marriage, but it was to be paid from his personal assets, which were now non-existent, seized by the federal government to repay his victims. She was legally entitled to $600,000 that would never exist. She walked away with nothing. No, not nothing. The auction began. The Italian marble tables, the custom Fendi sofas, the cold, abstract art Johnny had bought as investments. They were all sold off one by one. Elena waited. Lot 342, the auctioneer called out. A small, unsigned oil on canvas, landscape of the Northern California coast. We'll open the bidding at $100. It was the painting from her bedroom. It had hung opposite her bed, the one piece of art she had bought herself 10 years ago from a street fair in Santa Barbara before Johnny had forbidden such common purchases. It was the only thing in the entire 20,000-square-foot house that had ever felt like hers. A woman in a fur wrap bid $200. $250, Elena said, her voice clear. The woman looked at her annoyed. $300? $350, Elena countered immediately. The woman scoffed and turned away. Sold, the auctioneer cried, to Ms. Matheson for $350. She paid in cash with the last of the allowance money she had saved. She took the painting off the wall herself, tucked it under her arm, and walked out the front door, past the whispering wives and the rolling cameras, and never looked back. That afternoon she signed the final divorce decree. The next day, she legally changed her name. The clerk handed her the fresh driver's license. Elena Matheson. It looked foreign and perfect. She sold her car, a luxury sedan Johnny's company had leased for her. It was enough for a used Subaru wagon and a deposit. She packed one suitcase, put the painting on the passenger seat, and drove north on the I-5. She didn't have a plan. She just drove. She drove until the smog of Los Angeles was a bitter memory. She drove until the endless, sun-scorched hills of Central California gave way to the towering, misty pines of the north. She crossed the border into Oregon, and the air changed. It was cold, clean, and heavy with the smell of rain and salt. She found a town called Astoria, a working port clinging to a hillside where the Columbia River met the Pacific. It was a town of foghorns, old Victorian houses, and a kind of gruff, honest beauty. She found an apartment for rent above a sprawling, creaking bookstore called Mariner's Books. The apartment was small, the floors sloped, the kitchen was tiny, and the radiator hissed. Elena loved it. She hung her painting on the main wall. It was the only thing she hung. For the first 6 months she healed, or rather she deprogrammed. She had to relearn how to be a person, not a performance. The first week she would wake up at 6:00 a.m. in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, thinking she was late for a breakfast Johnny had scheduled. It took her 3 weeks to buy a pair of jeans that weren't designer, and she almost cried in the dressing room, paralyzed by the simple act of choosing something no one had to approve. She walked for hours every day. She walked along the rocky beach, letting the frigid Pacific spray hit her face. She walked until her legs ached, and her mind was quiet, scraped clean by the wind. She bought groceries, whatever she wanted. An apple, a loaf of bread, a bar of cheap chocolate. Each small, mundane choice was an act of quiet rebellion. She slept. For the first time in 12 years, she truly slept, lulled by the sound of the rain on the roof and the distant, mournful call of the foghorn. The nightmares of the courtroom, of Callie's laughter and Johnny's cold eyes slowly began to fade. When her money began to run low, she looked for a job. She found one at a local nursery just outside of town. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Greta, with hands like knotted roots, interviewed her. "Ever done this work?" Greta asked, looking at Elena's soft, uncalloused hands. "No," Elena said honestly. "But I learned fast and I'm not afraid to get dirty." "We'll see about that," Greta grunted. "You start Monday." The work was brutal. It was hauling 50-pound bags of mulch potting trees in the freezing rain and learning the Latin names for 1,000 different plants. Her back ached. Her nails were permanently stained with soil. She broke a fingernail on the second day, one of the perfectly manicured nails she used to spend $200 a week maintaining, and she laughed. She earned her first paycheck. It was for $412.33. It was the first money she had ever truly earned in her life. It felt more real, more valuable than the millions that had passed through the accounts Johnny controlled. The story ends not in a courtroom, but on a bright, cool Tuesday afternoon, 18 months after the collapse. Elena is unloading a flatbed of flowering dogwoods. Her hair is cut short and messy, tucked under a baseball cap. She's wearing stained overalls and work boots. "Hey, Elena," her coworker, a college kid named Ben, calls out. "You hear about that pelican down on Pier 39? The one that keeps trying to steal the fishermen's hats? The one they named Gary?" Elena laughs easily, hoisting a tree. "Mrs. Henderson told me he dive-bombed a tourist yesterday. Stole his toupee right off his head." Ben snorted. "No way a toupee, that's amazing." Elena's laugh is a real unguarded sound. It's a sound that had been silenced for over a decade. In that moment, she is unrecognizable from the pale, trembling woman in the couture suit who had crumpled to the floor of the LA courthouse. She is unknown. She is by every metric Johnny Vance had ever used a complete and total failure. She is also, for the first time in her entire adult life, completely and utterly free. The collapse in the courtroom, she realized, hadn't been an end. It wasn't a breakdown. It was a hatching. She hadn't fainted from weakness. She had broken the shell, shedding the cold, brittle porcelain skin of Elena Vance. She had fallen, but she had stood up as Elena Matheson. And that's how Elena finally found her justice, not in the millions she was owed, but in the freedom she truly deserved. The empire of lies built by Johnny and Callie came crashing down all because they fatally underestimated the woman they tried to destroy. They mistook her silence for weakness and her kindness for stupidity. What did you think of the final verdict? Was Callie as guilty as Johnny, or was she just another younger victim of his manipulation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of real-life justice and seeing the wicked get exactly what they deserve, please do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Share this video with someone who needs to see that the truth, no matter how buried, will always find its way out. And most importantly, please subscribe and ring that notification bell. We post incredible stories of drama, revenge, and justice every single week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening.